Om Sadashivasamarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Parayantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Om. Good. Be seated, please. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryan Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Very good. Welcome back, and welcome to all of our students attending these classes online. We continue today with our study of Uddhava Gita. In our last class, we finished a section generally called Jnana Lakshana, the traits of an enlightened person, how to recognize how these teachings lead to an inner transformation. What is the nature of that inner transformation? So that was our prior topic. And Lakshana is often translated as kind of a pointer or a signpost. A signpost, of course, tells you what direction to go to reach your goal, because if you're going the wrong direction, you'll never reach your goal, no matter how hard you try. Our discussion today is going to be a lot about misdirected effort. And of course, in various aspects of life, we actually find ourselves engaged in misdirected effort, and we suffer the consequences. You might remember an anecdote I told. This was decades ago when I was teaching at Arsha Vidya Gurukulam. If I got to remember this, I think every Tuesday I had a class in Bethlehem, which was south, and every Thursday I had a class at the University of Pennsylvania in Stroudsburg, which was north. So if I remember right, there was one Tuesday I was driving myself in those days, and I was driving, I had my class in Bethlehem, and I wasn't getting it. I didn't see signs for Bethlehem. I drove a little faster, and I figured out after a while I was driving the wrong direction. I was driving north when I should have been driving south. This is an example of misdirected effort, and it shows how no matter how our effort actually leads us in the wrong direction. So we're going to see some examples Sri Krishna gives of misdirected effort in this next series of verses. So we'll begin. Yes. Shabda Brahmani Nishnato, Shabda Brahmani Nishnato, Na Nishnayat Pare Yadi, Na Nishnayat Pare Yadi, Shramastasya Shramapalo, Shramastasya Shramapalo. Yadheno-miva rakshataha, Yadheno-miva rakshataha. This is such a common problem. Suppose there is somebody who is nishnataha, highly skilled. Skilled in what? Shabda Brahmani. Shabda Brahma. Brahma in the form of words is a common expression for scriptures. Shabda Brahma just means scriptures in general. The Vedas in particular are called Shabda Brahma. So we're talking here, Sri Krishna is referring to one then who is highly skilled in the scriptures, meaning someone who is a great pundit, a great scholar. What about that scholar? Na nishnayat pare yadi, if that great scholar, na nishnayat, is not skillful, pare, in the highest truth, meaning in Brahman. Meaning, scholarship, we've had this discussion many times, scholarship will not make you enlightened. The solution to your problems is not in the scriptures. The solution to your problem is here. You know, how ridiculous it is if we think that the answer is here someplace. This is a guide, this meaning scripture in general, is a guide telling us how to properly perform a process of self-inquiry, a process that is meant to culminate in the discovery of your true nature as Satchidananda Atma. So this is a means and not an end. But scholars are those for whom the scripture is the end and not means the goal. Scripture is the goal. Mastering the scriptures is the goal. Of course, in ancient times, priests had to memorize the Vedas in order to perform all the rituals properly. But those priests were not seeking moksha. Those priests were seeking a good job. You know, that's what they did to support themselves and their families. That was their job, to perform rituals. So they mastered the Vedas. They were indeed Shabda Brahmani Nishnataha. Those priests were highly skilled in the Vedic teachings, but that doesn't lead to enlightenment. And now he gives, so this is our first example of misdirected effort. I'm frowning now because some people are very intent on memorizing the Bhagavad Gita, which is lovely. To memorize the Bhagavad Gita is wonderful. But if your goal is memorizing those 700 verses, aren't you kind of missing the point? The point is not to memorize 700 verses. The point is to understand those 700 verses and use them for your own spiritual inquiry. So please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying memorization of the Bhagavad Gita is not to be done. It's wonderful. But if that is your goal, it is misdirected effort. Then he gives this hilarious example of misdirected effort. At least hilarious. If we lived in ancient India, we have to imagine, if we lived in ancient India, chances are we would all be subsistence farmers, right? That's 99.9% of the people in ancient India were indeed subsistence farmers. Those farmers would always keep cows for the sake of milk. And of course, cows would then create calves, and then calves will eventually grow up, become cows, give more milk. So milk is very important. Problem is, when cows, and we have to understand something about farming. None of us, I don't know anything about farming and keeping cows, but it's reasonable to assume that eventually a cow becomes too old to produce milk. Oh, she may be too old to produce calves, and if there's no calves she's producing, why should she produce milk? So this is the example. I don't know what that is. The example here is, he says that tasya shramapalaha, tasya, for that scholar, for that great pundit, his shramapalaha, the results of his shrama, effort, work. The results of his work is, in the second line you see eva, like. It is like the shramaha, the first word in the third line. It's like the effort done rakshataha, to take care of, you have to break these words apart. Hi adhenum. Dhenu is cow. Adhenu, Sanskrit has clever things. Adhenu does not mean not a cow. Adhenu in this context means a cow that doesn't give milk. According to a definition of a cow, there's a Sanskrit definition of a cow as a cow that gives, a cow is an animal that gives milk. So if it doesn't give milk, it's not a cow, adhenum. So here's the metaphor, caring for this old cow, and caring, again, we won't appreciate this, not having lived in ancient India, not having much experience with farm life. A few of you may have grown up in a village, I don't know. Anyway, farmers grow attached to their animals. I mean, if you have a dog or cat at home, do you grow attached to that animal? So think of the farmer with his beloved cow that has given him milk for such a long time, and when it stops giving milk, what will that farmer do? He continues, he loves that cow. He continues to take care of it. His attachment leads to effort which is fruitless. So caring for this cow is fruitless. That is a metaphor. By the way, cows should be taken care of. We know that. But it's a metaphor here for how mere scholarly study of scriptures is as fruitless as trying to get milk out of this old cow. That's the idea. Okay, next verse. And we have the longer meter here. Gam dugda doham asatim cha bharyam. Gam dugda doham asatim cha bharyam. Deham para dhinam asat prajam cha. Deham para dhinam asat prajam cha. Vittam tvati tirtha kritam Vittam tvati Vittam tvati tvatirti Vittam tvatirti kritamangavacham Vittam tvatirti kritam acham hinam maya rakshati dukkha dukkhi Chinam maya rakshati dukkha dukkhi. Good. My chanting stops whenever I don't get the meaning. I don't chant syllables, I chant words, and if the word isn't clear, my chanting gets stopped. So here, more examples of misdirected effort, and in the last line, he says this person with misdirected effort is dukkha dukkhi, goes from suffering to suffering to suffering. Why? Rakshati. Now, rakshati literally means cares for, protects. But it's like caring for that cow. You care for that cow because you're attached. And not just attached to that cow, you're attached to getting milk, right? So attachment to the phala, attachment to karma phala, you want to get milk out of that old cow, and you're not going to get milk out of that old cow, but your efforts are misdirected. Misdirected why? Attachment. You want that phala, you want that milk. So that's what he says here. You become dukkha dukkhi, you suffer a lot. One suffers a lot, rakshati, one who cares for, out of attachment, gam. First line, gam is cow. Also can mean earth, but here it means cow. A cow who is dugdha doham, a cow who has been thoroughly milked. That's what it means. The doha is milking, dugdha means milked. The cow who has given all the milk she is going to give in her lifetime, so referring to the prior metaphor. So these metaphors we can translate into modern life also. To invest for the farmer, to invest all of this effort into this cow that wanting to get milk and not getting the milk, that misdirected effort. A little bit, good modern example would be trying to find contentment through professional advancement. This is a very common issue for many people. Nothing wrong with professional advancement is great. I mean, you do something worthwhile, you get paid better for your efforts, and you get whatever perks go along with your job. Nothing wrong with that. The problem is when your sense of worth depends on being successful in your profession. That happens a lot. And when things go wrong at work, such a person then feels worthless, useless, depressed, because their effort is misdirected. Now notice it's not the effort to make money is properly directed. The effort to find contentment is misdirected. Do you see the difference here? If you work a profession, you work in a profession for the sake of money, to fulfill your responsibilities, and especially if you do it as a karma yogi, wonderful. But if you go to work to feel good about yourself, this is misdirected effort. You're going to work for contentment, for self-esteem, and this is where dukkha dukkhi, you suffer. So notice each of these examples we can convert into some modern situation. Next example he gives of misdirected effort, that verb rakshati goes to each of these examples. There are actually 6 examples given. The next one is asatim cha bharyam rakshati. Bharyam, wife. Asatim, not a good wife, and often translated as an unfaithful wife. What about an unfaithful husband? Which is probably more often the case. Anyway, by the way, unfaithful could be husbands and even wives can fall in love with their professions. Not uncommon, right? So that would be an example of a sati, of one who is not good, one who is not doing the right thing. The point here is, if you are totally attached to a spouse, who is not emotionally available to a spouse whose focus lies outside the family, you will suffer. That's just a fact. That's what he says, dukkha dukkhi. If you are attached to a spouse who is not emotionally engaged, whose focus is not on the family, that is a cause for suffering. And that is a second example then of misdirected effort. Third example, deham paradhinam rakshati, bringing in the word. Somebody who is attached to rakshati, and here rakshati can be taken in the sense of protecting, caring for deham, the body. Body which is para adhinam. It is not in your control. It is in another, it is controlled by the laws of nature. And when I see this expression, I can only think of, this wouldn't apply, I think, here, but there are many women who are very, very attached to how their faces look. I don't get it, but that's okay. I look in the mirror and I just see someone who looks ridiculous. It's okay. Yeah, it doesn't look good, but who cares? It's just a face, after all. But there are many women who don't feel that way at all. The skin is getting wrinkly, or this is not right, that's not right. These plastic surgeons make a lot of money nowadays. So look at this. The effort to maintain that face is misdirected effort. Because it's going downhill no matter what you do. Okay. There's a more serious example of this misdirected effort. When your loved one is in a hospital with doctors say there's nothing that can realistically be done for your loved one, and you want extraordinary measures to be taken to keep your loved one alive in spite of the fact that the doctor says they're dying. Another good example, misdirected effort, because the deham, the physical body, is para adhinam. It is not under your control. It is not even under the control of the doctors, as skillful as they are. It is under control of the laws of nature. Okay. Next example of misdirected effort is rakshati, caring for asat prajam. Interesting examples he gives. Very apt examples in ancient times and modern times. Prajam here means your son or daughter. A son or daughter who is asat, like that asatim we saw in the first line. So here, an asat prajam, a son or daughter who is on a path of adharma. Supporting, it's the duty of every parent to take care of their children without question, rakshati. So it is absolutely the duty of every parent to care for their children, adult children we're talking about now. But what about, this comes up occasionally, an adult child who is addicted to meth or some other illicit drug. If the parents provide financial assistance to that child, that money will be used to purchase drugs which will be harmful. So that's an example of misdirected effort, or something that often happens in families around the world. In fact, a big problem in India, and that is those who have problems with alcohol, who are alcoholics, by the way, alcoholism is a disease. It is not a character defect. Please educate yourself. Alcoholism is not a character defect. Long ago, doctors figured out it is a disease of addiction. Problem is that too many families think it's not a disease of addiction, it's just a character defect, and eventually my son or daughter will come out of that problem, so the parents go on. The term psychologists use is enabling. You become an enabler to that addictive behavior. Misdirected effort. And it's significant that the parent thinks that they're helping the child, but in fact, they're enabling this self-destructive, addictive behavior. These are unusual situations, but they're pretty good examples of misdirected effort. Next example, vittam tu atirti. So this is a little unusual word. Atirti kritam. Tirtha is holy place. Tirti, those who go to these holy places. So vittam, which is kritam, given to atirti, those who don't go to holy places. Now, this is kind of an obscure expression. It means giving your money not to good people who are deserving, but giving your money to people who are not deserving. And I was trying to think of a modern example. So here the example is, you should give your money, the term used is pilgrim for tirti. So Sri Krishna's orientation is, it's good to give your money to tirti, to pious pilgrims, and it's not so good to give your money to those who are not pious. This is kind of his point here. I was thinking, what would be a modern example? Money given for the wrong reasons. There are, in Washington, and I want to avoid politics, so let's talk about lobbyists. Set the politicians aside. Lobbyists who are paid tremendous amounts of money to convince members of Congress that there's no such thing as climate change, that oil is the most important thing. These lobbyists are paid by major companies, obviously, who have their own vested interests. These lobbyists receive a tremendous amount of money to do the wrong thing. This is a wonderful country. Our system of democracy is flawed like anything, but it is better than anything else. Better than the alternatives. I don't know if you're watching what's happening in Pakistan right now. So Khan's party won more votes, but this other guy has claimed victory, and he can legally do... What a mess. He can legally claim victory even though he has fewer seats. Go figure. You think our democracy is a mess. Pakistan is also, at least in name, a democracy. My point is that this country, in spite of its apparently strong democracy, has several crucial problems. Lobbying is one of those crucial problems. People don't talk about it enough, which is why I'm stressing it a little bit right now. The effect of lobbyists in Washington is a great disservice to our country. Of course, there are positive, there are some Hindu groups who also are in Washington lobbying. That's a very different thing. We're talking about lobbying for oil or lobbying against responding to climate change, etc. So examples of misdirected effort, money going in the wrong direction. And the last example he gives, which leads into the next verse. The last example he gives, anga, by the way, that word anga is like dear one, oh dear. He's addressing, Sri Krishna is addressing Uddhava, his cousin. He says, anga, oh dear one. And the last example of misdirected effort is vacham, speech, which is maya hinam, without reference to me, Sri Krishna says, which means speech which is completely, worldly, speech which is bereft of any value as sadhana. So Sri Krishna's perspective throughout this text is life is meant ultimately for sadhana. Doesn't mean you ignore other aspects of life, but the ultimate principle to be followed in life is to live a life of sadhana, spiritual growth. And if all your speech here represents all your activities, if all your activities are directed towards worldly accomplishments, this is to put a modern spin on Sri Krishna's words here. If all your efforts in life are directed solely to worldly accomplishments, your efforts are misdirected. For obvious reasons, this is what Sri Krishna teaches. And now this idea of speech, he goes on with in the next verse. Before we see the verse, lots of speech is dedicated to totally useless things. You know, let me. Why do we talk so much? And I'm not being facetious. There is a psychological compulsion to speak. And why? We want other people to hear us, to pay attention to us, to help us, to like us, right? How much of our daily speech is focused on that? I'll tell you an interesting time when I was studying during our 3-year course at Swami Tadatmananda's ashram in Pennsylvania. Several times I practiced maunam, and what we would do in those days is you'd put a sticker or something on your clothing saying maunam, so no one, all your fellow students wouldn't try to engage you in conversation. They knew you were practicing maunam today. And in practicing maunam, I learned so much about this psychological pressure to speak for reasons of drawing attention to yourself. So many, if speech were only for the purpose of accomplishing what needed to be accomplished, no problem. But so much of our speech, and this is what I discovered by practicing maunam, that many times the impulse to say something came up not for the sake of addressing some issue, but for the sake of calling attention to myself, maybe demonstrating something I know and want to show off to others how much I know. A lot of speech falls into that kind of category. And that speech is something you you may not even be aware of, chances are it's a major part of the speech you engage in each day. So, with this in mind, and the reason I'm giving this a more common example is gossip, but gossip, everyone talks about gossip. We'll set gossip aside in terms of, actually, let me come to gossip after we've read the verse. This verse also is in the longer meter. Yasyam name pavanamanga karma, yasyam name pavanamanga karma, stit yudbhava prana nirodhamasya, stit yudbhava prana nirodhamasya, Leelavatare psita janmavasyad, Leelavatare psita janmavasyad, Vandhyam giram tham bibhrayan adhiraha, Vandhyam giram tham bibhrayan adhiraha. Starting the last line. Dhiraha here means a wise person. A wise person, na bibhrayan, would not engage in tam giram, in such speech. Giram means speech. In such speech that is vandhyam, useless, fruitless. So a wise person does not engage in useless speech. And I spoke too early about gossip. That's usually the example given here. And I have a feeling you spend much more time using speech to draw attention to yourself more time than time spent in gossip. Gossip is common enough. I have a feeling for most people using speech not for gossip, but to draw attention to oneself is perhaps more common. They're both equally problematic. We're using speech not in a proper way. To use speech for gossip, to use speech to draw attention to yourself, both are examples of vandhyam giram, useless speech. So, we know what useless speech is. Now, what is useful speech? Now, this is useful speech according to whom? Sri Krishna. So, expect it to have Sri Krishna's own flavor, so to speak. So, he says, speech that is not useless is speech that yasyam, actually we've got a more double negative here. So speech which is useless is speech which, in the first line, yasyam, speech which, yasyam, which may pavanam karma, may, my, pavanam, holy, karma, deeds. My holy deeds, the stories of Sri Krishna in Mathura defeating Kamsa and in the Mahabharata. So all these stories of his holy deeds, if the speech na yasyam, if you're not talking about Sri Krishna's holy deeds, Sri Krishna says that is Vandhyam Giram. So little biased, I suppose. But you get the larger point is that if ultimately sadhana, spiritual growth, is the most important aspect of your life. Look at this. This is a very important point. What is important to you? Many, many things. I have a feeling for most of you, spiritual growth is really important. Otherwise, you wouldn't be sitting here today. So here's the question. if spiritual growth is really important to you, how much of your daily effort is directed towards spiritual growth? And in particular, how much of your speech throughout the day is engaged in this process of spiritual growth? That's his point. Of course, he's giving this very kind of traditional bhakti-oriented example. You should be talking about Sri Krishna's deeds, his holy deeds, but in general, you get the point. Our attention should be focused on what's important. Sorry to be a little poking. What is this? I don't pushing buttons. How much television do you watch each day? This is a good example for many people. Or how much time do you spend browsing the internet? How's that one? So, and how much does that contribute? How important is that in the bigger scheme of life? Right? Is it one of the important things? You have your, what do they call, bucket list? And on your bucket list is watch more TV? On your bucket list is browse the web more? Come on. But how much effort goes into these kinds of activities? Anyway, this is Sri Krishna's point. Even though the language he's using may not seem very relevant, his point is extremely relevant. He goes on to say that the speech, if the speech is the speech about sthiti, Uddhava, prana nirodham, may. If you're not talking about may, Sri Krishna says my sthiti, creation of my Uddhava, take first. My Uddhava, my creation of the world, my sthiti, my sustenance of the world, and my prana nirodha, dissolution of the world. If you're not talking about Sri Krishna's holy deeds, including creation, sustenance, destruction, or if you're not talking about Leela Avatara, Sri Krishna as Leela Avatara, as an incarnation engaged in all these wonderful events, Leela, and Sri Krishna who is Ipsita Janma, whose birth is by choice. That Sri Krishna incarnated himself to engage in this Leela. By the way, Leela wasn't all fun and games. On the battlefield of Mahabharata, not fun and games, right? So don't misunderstand this term Leela here. It refers to all his activities. So if your speech is not focused on Sri Krishna's holy deeds in his lifetime, then your speech is misdirected. And then to put that in a more relevant modern context, if your daily activities and your speech in particular are not directed towards what's important, if they're directed towards television and web browsing, and if they're not directed towards spiritual growth, your efforts are misdirected. Okay, now, these 3 verses about misdirected effort. What about properly directed effort? We'll see that one more verse. Maybe 2, 1. We'll see. This is properly directed effort, and we're back to the shorter. You'd think I'd learn how to use this by now. Okay, thank you. Evam jignasaya pohya, evam jignasaya pohya, nanatva brahmamatmani, nanatvam brahmahatmani, uparameta virajam, uparameta virajam, mano mayarpya sarvage, mano mayarpya sarvage. And for those of you in our meditation session, that's the part I quoted, uparame virajam manas. We'll see that in just a minute. So, if your attention should not be focused on television and browsing the web, then what should it be focused on? It should be focused on jnasaya. Jnasa is a desire to know, a desire here for spiritual wisdom. And spiritual wisdom, which is gained how? Apohya, by negating what? Nanatva Brahmam Atmani. Brahma is error. Interesting, I just realized. Brahma means error, but the root meaning is to wander. The root meaning of Brahm is not to make a mistake. The basic meaning of Brahm is to wander, and wandering from the direction you should go is misdirected effort. So this word Brahmam is perfect for this context. Brahma, error, is indeed misdirected effort. And this misdirected effort, nanatva Brahmam, the misdirected effort, atmani, with regard to one's true self, nanatvam. We can take this, nanatvam means duality. And we can take it in a very technical Advaita Vedantic sense. But here, let's take it in a more general sense. And that is, atmani, for the sake of... What is that? Atmani, for the sake of yourself. I don't know what is going on. I hear these big kerchunks coming out of our audio system. I don't know why. Anyway. For this atmani, for the sake of your own contentment, we are engaged in nanatva Brahma. Brahma, the misplaced effort, nanatva, in so many directions. You're seeking contentment, well, on TV, on the web, at the mall, in the restaurant. Nanatva Brahma, misdirected effort, seeking contentment everywhere but in the true source of that contentment, which is Atmani, in oneself. So, apohya, giving up, actually negating that Brahmam, giving up that wrong, that misdirected effort. Or we could say then positively, giving up misdirected effort means to engage in properly directed effort. What is that properly directed effort? Actually, we got more giving up here. Uparameta is withdrawal. Your properly directed effort is uparama. Is to withdraw your attention from being so extrovert, TV, web, mall, restaurant, etc., 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 to withdraw from all these purely worldly activities and mayi arpya, dedicating your manas, mind, which has become virajam, pure. So this is he's not exactly talking about meditation, but he certainly could be. So what is to properly direct your attention is to direct your attention within. If misdirected effort is to direct your attention out there, television, computer, mall, etc., etc., if that is misdirected attention, properly directed attention is within. And that's why he says, Virajam manas, a mind which has been uparameta, withdrawn from these worldly attachments and directed arpya, and actually directed where? He says arpya, dedicated to mayi. Sri Krishna says, dedicated to me. Sarvage, the all-pervasive one. So he's not talking about himself as a Leela avatara here. He's referring to himself as Sarvaga. He's referring to himself as Ishvara. So to turn your attention away from these, to give up this misplaced effort of seeking contentment, happiness, and peace out there. To turn your attention within, to, that's apohya nanatva brahmam, to withdraw this misplaced effort and redirect it, apohya, giving up that extroversion, uparameta, withdrawing from this extroversion, and arpya, dedicating your viraja manas, your quieted mind, your pure mind, dedicating your mind to me. Let me just, I'm just looking at my scribbles here. Okay. Just to loop back, the comment, I'm looking at a comment, the commentator loops back. Let's loop back in a different way. I asked you just a few minutes ago, what's important in your life? And everyone recognizes that as such an important question, right? What is important in our lives is a really important question. How often do we ask it? What is going on? I don't know. Anyway, I'll look at that later. Why is it that, not why is it, we kind of intuitively know the answer, and that is we get caught up in the minutiae of life. You know that already. You don't need me to tell you that life is in fact, arguably, life is more full of distractions today than it ever has been before in world history. So we are bombarded by media, social media, bombarded by so many things, so many sources of distraction, all of which distract us from what's really important. So arguably, we are more challenged today than ever before in history. We are more challenged to discern what is important and what is not so important. So too much, you all agree, too much effort is going into what's not important. Not enough effort is going into what's important. So that's really Sri Krishna's message. And it's a very powerful message, important for us all. Okay, it's a good place to conclude. We'll continue. This text is excellent. We'll continue this next week. Brief announcements. Tomorrow, Sunday, we have our weekly Vedanta class, Shankara's brilliant text, Upadesha Sahasri. So come and join us. And then after that class is at 10 o'clock. Following the Vedanta class at 11 o'clock is Satsanga. So come with your questions. Come and join us. We'll conclude with our prayers at the altar. Gananahan tva ganapatigam avamahe kaving gavinam upamashravastamam jeshtarajam brahmanam brahmanaspatahana shranvan utibhisira sadhanam. Om Mahaganapataye Namaha Ishvaro Gurudhatmeti Murti Bheda Vibhagine Vyoma Vadvyapta Dehaya Dakshina Murtaye Namaha Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadguru. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityor Ma Amritangamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Tat Sat.